So good afternoon po to everyone and welcome again to Pumapapel. Siya na naman is an online talk on paper as medium in art then and now. So before we introduce our speakers tsaka moderator po for this afternoon, konting background lang po about this event and UP Asterisk. So UP Asterisk or Asosasyon ng Kabataang Artista, Kritiko at Scholar ng Sining at Kultura, Universidad ng Pilipinas is an organization at the Department of Art Studies in the College of Arts and Letters at the University of the Philippines in Diliman. And the organization somehow took a break during this pandemic, and now we are returning online. And through these series of online events, which we call On Paper, isang mapapel na online sining series, we wanted to present different online art events, which has one specific theme, which is yung paper or ang papel. I believe na mahalaga ang papel on its possibilities and its qualities as a material. So this talk, we will also have other events such as paper making workshop, zine workshop, and a few more after for the whole October. So for this afternoon, we will be joined by our moderator. She is an organization's alumna and a professor at the School of Design and Arts, College of St. Benil, teaching subjects in various topics in contemporary arts in the Philippines and also in the region. So I present the floor now to Miss Angelica Viceral.
Thank you, Gian. So good morning. So we have very distinguished guest speakers today. We're going to talk about paper as an art form. So if we talk about something about art, we talk about the materiality of it, the process, the culture of it, and our three speakers for today are going to talk about the different projects in relation to paper making, its cultural context, and as medium as well. I would just like to say that the idea of paper as a theme for this whole month event for Asterisk is organized by UP Asterisk is really a timely theme because the paper as a metaphor of yung papel in Tagalog. I'm a founding member of the org and thinking about how we started it years back. Hindi ko na sasabihin kung gaano katagal, but we actually wanted to advocate on the role of art in society and how we can help transform different things in society. So maganda yung tema, yung metaphor ng paper as papel ng sining sa nangyayari ngayon, whether it's a therapeutic process, whether it's a social process or a social engagement context. I think that it's a very timely topic to discuss. So we have three distinguished guests today, all discussing their projects about paper. We have Miss Maria Lourdes Po, who works at the Museo ng Museum of Archdiocese of Manila, Roman Catholic Archbishop of Manila in Intramuros. She's going to talk about her project about paper in the Spanish colonial period. And then Mr. Ricky Francisco, he is the director of Fundacion Sansó. He's going to talk about one of his curatorial projects at Galerie Stephanie entitled Position Paper. And then we have another alumna of the organization, Miss Kat Bro, who is going to talk about her process as artist using paper as well, and her exhibitions in Altro Mondo and Galerie Stephanie. I think this was also part of Sir Ricky's project called Position Paper. So, Gian, do we have I think Ma'am Norma will be introducing Miss Lourdes. Do we have you? We have Ma'am Norma. Just a little background though. Years back, baka hindi alam, baka may nanonood ng mga younger batches also. Ma'am Norma is one of the earliest faculty advisors of UP Asterisk. So, nung unang panahon. Okay na ba si Ma'am Norma? Ma'am Norma Respicio is a faculty from the Department of UP Art Studies. Guru po namin siyang lahat.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Okay
Good
na.
afternoon po.
Good afternoon. Okay. Okay. Am I being heard? Okay ba? Yes?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Maria Angelica. Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you so much for that. Buti nakasama ko dito. At I'll be introducing our first speaker, Maria Lourdes Po. She took her MA, no? Master of Arts in conservation, no? Cultural heritage, no? Cultural heritage studies sa may UST Graduate School. At ang kanyang naging thesis ay an annotated survey of the Barrett-Saya collection of the UP Diliman College of Home Economics, no? Costume Museum. So hindi lang siya sa papel si Maria Lourdes Po, kundi pati na rin sa cloth, no? Sa textiles. No? And she has attended several workshops and courses in conservation sa Hong Kong, sa Taiwan. And lately, in 2019 or last year, she attended the conservation course sa may ICON UK, no? Institution of Conservation sa may United Kingdom. No? There was this conference in Belfast, Northern Ireland. No? This was under the Getty Foundation. It was a grant from the Getty Foundation. And she also attended the professional development program on conservation held in London, also under the Getty grant. So now, Miss Maria Lourdes Po is with the Arzobispado ng Manila. She is a conservator there and also a curator at the museum. So I'm very honored to have and present to you our first speaker, Miss Maria Lourdes Po. Thank you very much, Maria Lourdes, for being here.
Hi, good afternoon to everyone, and thank you, Ma'am Norma, for the very warm introduction. And it is a privilege for me and a pleasure as well to be part of this online event. My topic for our talk today presents an overview of art on paper in the Philippines during the early years of the Spanish colonial period. This is from the first printed books of the late 16th century to the mid-18th century. In particular, I would like to briefly discuss the art of printing that developed during these periods. A number of significant scholarly works and publications on the history of Philippine printing and prints have already shed light to our knowledge. From these references, a historical perspective can be understood, and I would like to share this with our audience. Prints were the earliest forms of art on paper that developed during the early Spanish colonial period in the Philippines. Prints that bear artistic imagery using religious inspiration and motifs were created to aid in the catechism of Christianized inhabitants of the colony and to spread the Catholic faith. Woodblock printing and typography were introduced by Chinese immigrants of the period who were called Sangleyes, and who brought with them the knowledge of these printing processes that were eventually utilized by Catholic missionaries. The earliest books to be printed in the Philippines are the Doctrina Christiana and the Shilu. Printed in Manila in 1593, they are a type of xylograph or woodcut print on rice paper. Surviving facsimiles or exact copies of these books are now in the collection of overseas repositories. The Doctrina Cristiana, the one that you see here, is the Doctrina Cristiana en Lengua Española y Tagala, which is also called the Doctrina Tagala. It is a book of instruction and the basic teachings of the Catholic Church. It was printed under the patronage of the Dominican clergy. This book was written in Spanish and Tagalog, using Roman alphabet and the Baybayin script. Its title page depicts an image of Saint Dominic, founder of the Order of Preachers. The only known extant copy of this book is in the Lessing-Rosenwald collection of the Library of Congress in the United States. The Shilu, on the other hand, is also known as a Tratado de la Doctrina, is a philosophical treatise by the Dominican Juan Pobo and written in classical Chinese. On its title page is an illustration of Saint Dominic explaining the context of a book to a Chinese. Its only extant copy can be found in the National Library of Spain. A third and undated extant facsimile of the Doctrina Cristiana, written in Chinese, can be found in the collection of the Vatican Apostolic Library. It is decorated with the escudo or emblem of the Dominican order on its title page and has a colophon indicating the name of its Chinese printer, Keng Myong, and printed in the Parian de Manila. Copies of the Doctrina were published by the UST Press after its discovery in the Vatican Library in 1948. The one that you see here is actually copy from the UST Press, and it's also already available online in the digital collections of the UST Library. Aside from book illustrations, artistically rendered prints were also made into estampas, which are representations of saints in loose leaf edition prints or slips, or posters and frontispiece on title pages of early books. On special occasions, printed pastoral letters and sermons were embellished with filetes, or small decorative typographical adornment called vigneta, that appear in the form of an angel's head, bouquet of flowers, or stylized animal form. The main substrate material used during the early years of printing in the Philippines was papel de arroz, or rice paper, from China. Different kinds of rice paper continued to be produced in China that varies in weight, texture, and production method. It has been noted that a number of mulberry paper, called kotsu, was commonly received in Manila, and that cotton paper was more expensive. Furthermore, rice paper was chosen over papel de hilo, or linen paper, and a type of Spanish mold-made paper used in rolling cigarette. Typographic printing of books was also already being done around 1602, although woodcut printing continued to be the printing method of choice in the 17th century. Engraving on copper may have been done as early as 1701. Copper was an expensive and not readily available material that some local engravers of the period reused and engraved on the reverse side of the copper plates or assembled from small pieces. The first printing presses to be established in the Philippines were by religious congregations. As early as the 18th century, there already existed 3 printing presses in Manila, namely the Santo Tomas Press of the Dominicans, founded in 1593, the Jesuit Press, established in 1623, and the Franciscan Press, established in 1700. The beginning until the middle part of the 18th century was the height of printing in the Philippines. The period witnessed a proliferation of engraving on copper. By this time, engravers were already signing printing plates as indication of their artistic achievements. Our discussion of prints and printing will not be complete without mention of the printers or engravers. The first typographic or movable type printing press was set up possibly in 1602 by a Chinese convert, Juan de Vera. He is also attributed to have printed the two versions of the Doctrina Christiana. The art of printing introduced by the Chinese eventually flourished in the hands of local artists. The first to be engaged in this art was Tomas Pinpin. Sorry, let me go back to my previous slide. So Tomas Pinpin is also attributed for having done the earliest known woodcut print by a Filipino. So from, I have made a list of a table of names of known engravers of the period and the years they were active in the production of prints. The first would be Juan de Vera, who is actually a Chinese and brother of his, Pedro de Vera. So the first Filipino artist or printer was Tomas Pinpin. This particular piece, the woodcut print by the earliest work of Tomas Pinpin, is actually a decorative escudo or emblem of the Dominican order, and it adorned the title page of a book published in 1610. This was by Fray Francisco de San Jose and entitled Arte y Reglas de la Lengua Tagalog. The most active engravers during the mid-18th century were Francisco Suarez, Nicolas de la Cruz Bagay, and Laureano Atlas. It is said that Bagay was the most prolific of the three in terms of the range of prints that he created. Both Suarez and Bagay were commissioned to print the first scientific map of the Philippines that was drawn by the Jesuit cartographer Pedro Murillo Velarde. The map also shows vignettes of daily life of different groups of people in the islands. This is also commonly known as the Pedro Murillo Velarde 1734 map. Extant copies of this map are in the collection of the Library of Congress and the National Library of Spain. So this is recently there was news about this map, and a Filipino was able to purchase a copy and donated it to the National Museum. Laureano Atlas is best known for his engraving of the frontispiece in the 1749 Historia book of Pedro Murillo Velarde, which bears the images of the Nuestra Señora de la Rosa, Our Lady of the Rose, which is enshrined in the parish of Saints Peter and Paul Makati, and of the image of the Nuestra Señora de La Paz y Buen Viaje, or Our Lady of Antipolo. This was the most popular or most celebrated print done by Laureano Atlas. Another significant work is an elaborate engraving of the Nuestra Señora del Rosario in her altar at the Santo Domingo Church in Manila, which was done in 1759. A restrike of this engraving was done by Fray Jose Azcarracate and Vicente Atlas around 1825. So our museum, the Museo ng Arkidiyosesis of Maynila, actually has one print of this Our Lady of La Naval print on paper, and another one that was recently donated that we are about to receive is on silk. So to conclude, as a conclusion, printing and prints created during the early years of its development in the Philippines evolved into full expressions of human creativity and skill that eventually reached a golden age in the 18th century. Many surviving prints from this period are now considered heritage objects of significance and value. It is hoped that others will be encouraged to engage in further research and scholarship on this art form. this ends my presentation, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Yay. Thank you very much, Miss Lourdes.
Thank you.
That was a very informational presentation. I think things that are very important to remember about her talk was fast. It was interesting for me, especially these days, to root the influence of Chinese people in our heritage. Um, all this issue about racism, about their influence nowadays in the society and all that's happening politically. Um, we can't really do away with the influence of Chinese people, and if we look back at a lot of historical sources, we don't really they have not talked about Chinese heritage a lot. That's like one gap in Philippine history. Hindi mo siya masyadong pinag-uusapan. The Chinese aspects in our Filipino identity. We're very diverse talaga as a culture, and yes, we can't do away with
Yes.
the Chinese influence, especially with
Yes.
what you discussed with Pedro de Vera, Tomas Pinpin, etc. So I guess that's one thing to consider when we're
Yes.
talking about all the heritage and
Yes.
hate around the world. So
And
yun
also
lang.
to, also to add with what you mentioned, for us who work in the Archdiocese, personally, our first Filipino saint,
Mhm.
Lorenzo Ruiz, was actually
Yes.
part Chinese. So
Yes.
Yeah.
we have a lot of, we're actually, it's part of our culture. And of course, culture is evolving, it's always changing, there will always be issues. And I guess it's a matter of looking into the positive side of things rather than
Yeah.
Yes.
And actually deconstruct what we're talking about. We can't just say anything based on emotions per se. So
yes,
we really have to
yes,
be critical about things. And number two is the availability of digital resources. We have a lot of resources going online now.
yes.
So that's really
Let's
interesting to
agree.
know.
Mm-mm.
Hopefully it can, foster more research, and like your topic, your field could grow into more credible research. It
Yeah.
could inspire other people to do this. And um, what else? Yun, accessibility to collections. Yun lang, medyo like
Yes.
hopefully we can get more access, because you've mentioned a lot of museums abroad.
Yes. They have opened their archives. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-mm.
So
I'm for
hopefully
that.
with all this, digital humanities movement and open source aspects, we're able, I mean, these are our heritage. And
Yes.
before pre-pandemic, when people are not too open with the digital aspect and digital distribution, we don't really have access to it. But now that we have more access to more credible sources, I hope this could grow into
Yes.
a healthier
I,
research and bigger research
it,
as well. Thank you.
thank
We
you.
can
Thank you
do the
also.
Q&A after all the speakers have presented. We now move on to um, Mr. Ricky Francisco. Let me introduce him. So, Mr. Ricky Francisco, as mentioned earlier, is the director of Fundacion Sansó. His curatorial education is grounded on practice. His experience includes being a curatorial assistant, a museum registrar, a collections manager, working with institutions such as the Ayala Museum, Lopez Memorial Museum and Library, and Yuchенko Museum, to name a few. In September 2019, among his many curated shows, he curated the show in Galerie Stephanie titled Position Paper 2019, an annual show that brings focus to paper as medium. So he's going to talk about that today. Let's all welcome Mr. Ricky Francisco.
Thank you,
Good
Ange.
afternoon.
Good afternoon. Maraming salamat sa napakagandang introduction na napaka-researched. I feel so privileged to be sharing this afternoon with you. Can you hear me? Is it all right? Okay.
Yes.
So, aside from that, thank you everyone for tuning in with us this afternoon. As you could see from our previous speaker, kay Ms. Lourdes Po, ang dami-daming matututunan with regards to paper. This afternoon, ako naman, mag-share ako ng mas personal na framework kung sa experience ko with paper. I'd like to share how I'm fascinated with paper as a medium. In the exhibitions that I'm going to share, yung breadth of paper as an artistic medium sana ma-share ko, at saka yung contexts at which paper as a medium is being utilized in exhibition making. So paper is one of the more common materials in our lives, but it's also one of the most important. Kasi from the moment we wake up, we get news, we get information from it, we put our innermost thoughts and our feelings on paper to record it. Pati yung mga walang kwentang thoughts, basta nagmamadili ka, ilalagay mo dyan as a jotting. Or yung mga ni-research mo ng napakatagal, ilalagay mo sa isang libro, which is also paper. It also is a physical container of stuff. We wrap things with it, we carry things with it, even food is placed in it, or even liquids like water or hot coffee, we could put it in paper. So it's very, very versatile as a medium. We play with it, we pay with it, we track with it. From our birth, we are recorded, our lives are recorded on it. During our most productive years, or even in death, paper leaves a trail for us to prove that we exist. In the afterlife, in our beliefs, may papakita ng paper yung wide scope ng ating mga paniniwala, ng ating kultura, ng ating pag-asa, ng ating mga values as a people, or yung mga boundaries ng ating territories, yung propaganda that we want to share or want to believe in, the scientific discoveries that we've made, and our faith. It's all contained in paper. And our history as a race, as a species, is in it. So it's no wonder why many artists would use paper in a variety of ways to express their art. You could see it in various ways being utilized because of its physical attributes, its color, the way it can be folded, the way it follows lines, the way it could be written on, the way it could be cut. These are all aspects of the physical attributes of paper, which make it a very viable medium for artists. In 2010, while I was still working with Lopez Museum, I chanced upon this exhibition curated by Jenny Havelosa and Danny Alvarez. It was called Pumapapel. In that exhibition, there was this great installation by Tony Gonzalez and Tess Pasola called The Suspended Garden. What looks like stone or probably asteroids is actually paper mache made to look like stone. And you could view it from below while you lie down on a rug or an oversized carpet made from corded newspaper. So this was one of the favorite paper works that I've seen in contemporary times, and it was reinstalled in 2014, and it's now a semi-permanent feature at the Yuchенko Museum, and I think you can still see it if you go there. But I was invited because of position paper, which I curated in 2018. I don't know how, but Giancarlo Delgado and Koki Lee somehow remembered it, which I'm very grateful for. Often kasi the nature of what we do in exhibitions, it's very ephemeral. When we put it up, you only experience it when you go there for a short time, and when it's gone, it only exists as documentation on paper or digital. So I was very lucky that they remembered this 2018 show where we invited various artists, almost 40 artists participated to showcase yung different aspects of paper. We had national artists such as Alcoas, Jerry Navarro. We had notable artists like Juvenal Sansó, as well as very, very young artists who were still in college back then to showcase different aspects of paper. Why did we do it? We did it because Galerie Stephanie and I shared the same belief that there's a bias against paper by many collectors because of its many physical properties, such as it could be crumpled or torn, and sometimes microorganisms can use it as food. So there's foxing, or it could be wet, it could be very acidic, and it could crumble. Collectors think that works on paper are not worth collecting at all, or they just prefer more sturdy media such as canvas and wood and metal over paper. However, there are some things that cannot be done in those mediums that only paper can do. So we continued with position paper to showcase the various ways that paper is utilized by artists, and it can express a lot of things. So to address the bias, instead of our usual opening, we had a talk called Conversations in Conservation, where we invited Loreto Apilado, June Dalisay, Mrs. Sanyares. I think Lou was out of the country at that time, so I wasn't able to invite her. But if she were here, I would have invited her as well, just to showcase the physical properties of paper and how it could be taken care of. Because in the right conditions, paper can last for even thousands of years. Yeah. So, and as you could see, one of our speakers was actually there. Kat Grow is in the front row. Um, so we invited Loreto, Missy, and June to talk about paper, and it was well attended both by artists who were interested in the medium, by collectors, and by specialists who are collecting not just artworks on paper, but for example, books, archives, or letters, so they could take care of their paper as well. So this is Loreto showing how to encapsulate a work on paper so that it could be handled safely. We have Mr. Dalisay, who's a writer, also interested, of course, on the medium on which he writes. So this was our opening. And as I said, there were a lot of artists, and we were able to showcase how paper was being utilized in various ways. So there were traditional paintings on paper, collages on paper, acrylics, even drawings. Oh yeah, there's one more thing. One of the other biases against paper is that it's considered something as a preparatory thing. So a drawing for many collectors is just a sketch that leads to a painting on canvas. But so we invited artists who were really into drawing, who used drawing as a final project, finished project, not just a means to an end. There were also people who were thinking that prints, which are usually on paper, are not unique. So we also invited printmakers to address that issue. We have here some other stuff, like the artwork on the left is by Blaise Zamora. He used paper tape instead of just usual paper, and then he cut it to create images. Mikay Rodrigo, on the other hand, layered several papers and then cut out portions to create images from what she removed. So there's a negative on that. Julius Clar, for example, created complex collages using photos and cut out pictures and overlaid against wood. Gino would use wheat starching, which is a technique that street artists use. So marami kaming nagawa with paper. Vince De Pio created a paper sculpture through origami, and then he painted over it, so it became something more, something different. And Demet de la Cruz created this wonderful serigraph, which you could see. MMU gave us keychain-sized photo books that are all thematic. This artwork was all bought even before we opened by someone who just walked in. So hindi pa kami open, nakita niya to, binili niya agad the entire set. So somehow, that really encouraged us to continue. And Galerie Stephanie invited me again for another position paper in 2019, where I had the honor of working with more artists. There were still national artists there, but there were really new expressions, artistic expressions on paper by other artists that we were able to see. One of them was by Kat Grow, who will be one of the speakers. She used her own pigments she made, and then she'll explain more about the process in making her art. later. Tapos andun din sila Stephanie Alvarez, who created paintings that looked like rose petals. Marami ring ibang forms, like this could be considered almost like a sculpture. And ito, paper sculpture talaga yung nasa left. So through position paper, we were able to showcase the versatility of the medium. However, my fascination for paper is really farther than that. So even as far back as 2016, I created this show for the Ateneo Art Gallery called Other, Sobel and Sansó, to showcase prints and drawings, which are for me as important as the final works themselves. Not many people know that Juvenal Sansó was actually one of the very first artists who used printmaking as a medium, as an artistic medium, and exhibited it in 1957 here in the Philippines. Going back to the history that Lou presented, a lot of it was it was commissioned by the church or by the state. Ito naman yung parang on his own na created artistic works. Alongside him was Fernando Sobel. And dun ko pinakita yung mga fascinations nila. Like, for example, yung different stages ng paggawa ng copper plate etching, yung mga drawings na they usually draw wherever they go. Both artists sketched prolifically. Tapos itong buong to, yung mga sketches ni Sobel during his trip sa Ilocos to showcase yung Spanish influence in local art. This became the basis for an entire book. Na very collectible na ngayon. At about the same year, I co-curated this show called Propaganda at the Lopez Museum with Ethel Villafranca, where we focused on history as it is reflected through propaganda. The Lopez Museum is a unique museum and library because it has a lot of collections that are paper-focused, paper-centric. On the side lang muna, makikita niyo to, propaganda was actually very politically motivated din kasi it was before the elections, which led to the election of President Duterte. May mga bagay dito like these are colored note, how do you say this? Post-its. Tapos meron kaming questions that they could answer using their colored post-its. So paper became essential in getting the feedback of our exhibition goers. And nandito rin sa collection yung kunyari propaganda materials by the Japanese during World War II, studies ni Hidalgo for his propagandist paintings, tapos a lot of books from the colonial era. And then there was this large collection of editorial cartoons that was in the collection as well. So we included that. Our guest artists were Nune Alvarado, who was a social realist and created this installation of paper, and Joey Cobcobo, who created this huge installation that people could co-create with him. They just had to wear the bakya and then create the prints on the paper, on the oversized paper. So it was an installation and an art and then print at the same time. So coincidental with that was our exhibit called Common Ground, which was about the national boundaries of the Philippines because of the West Philippine Sea issue, yung mga contested islands. And we had maps that proved the Philippine territory from as early as the 16th and 17th century. So Chief Justice Carpio was the one who spoke about this during the exhibition. So I hope that by sharing this exhibitions, makita nyo yung contexts ng how paper is used and how we could utilize it in various ways. And maraming salamat ulit sa lahat. Thank you sa UP Asterisk.
Thank you. Thank you
you.
for sharing your piece of your professional journey with us. That was very interesting. Things that I think we should remember from Sir Ricky's presentation. I personally remember that suspended garden. That's one of my favorite installations in Yuchenko. Kasi nga nakahiga ka eh. So I loved interacting with that when I was still studying. And then I remember going to that exhibit also, yung propaganda for a class in grad school. So I think one important thing, learn from the material culture of paper. Diba? When you write on paper, you try to make a mark. And ganito din siguro yung kailangan gawin natin ngayon. Like in whatever we do, we have to like make a mark in things that we're doing kasi ang daming nangyayari. We have to contribute. And if we try to dig deeper into the metaphor of, paper making, its material culture, yung role ng sining ay mag-make din ng mark sa buhay ng mga tao. Parang ako, di ba, naalala ko si Suspended Garden and si Propaganda. Ang binibigay kasi ng art yung lifelong learning. And there's sabi nga ni Ricky, nakakalimutan yung exhibit eh. Pagka 2018 pa ba siya? Yung iba makakalimutan mo na, but like me who engaged with it, there's a sense of intangible effect to me kasi yung smell, yung texture, yung movement ng katawan ko dun sa installation, touching the paper, writing on paper, printing a bakya print on an installation, all those are remembered by your body. Like in the time of pandemic where, di ba, lahat tayo nagreklamo, ang gumagana lang usually yung mata, saka yung tenga, pag nag-zoom ka, di ba? We have to go back and learn about the material culture of paper na yung mas tangible effect. Meron kasing, paano ba? There's beauty behind the tangibility of the material culture of paper. Other than it's making a mark, it helps you remember things and document things. Pero yung proseso niya at yung texture niya, it makes you remember things. It makes you feel something. And yun na nga, sa pandemic season, kailangan natin makaramdam bukod sa tenga at saka sa mata. So I guess we have to learn from, the material culture, the processing, the making of paper. It's a lifelong learning skill that we have to remember. And sinabi rin ni Sir Ricky that paper can last for 1,000 years kapag nabigyan mo siya ng chance para ma-conserve. Diba? Ganyan din siguro yung mga mahahalagang buhay ngayong, pandemic. We have to learn about things and, we have to learn about the good things in life these days para tumagal pa siya ng mas mahabang panahon. Maintain the beauty of art making para tumagal pa siya ng mas malayong panahon. So, yun lang. Learn from the material culture of paper, I guess. Yun yung magandang natutunan ko. Other than, the extensive curatorial practice that he's presented to us. So, thank you for sharing with us your project, Sir Ricky. We now move on to, if you have questions, kindly save them for later. Our next speaker would be Ms. Kat Grow. She is also an alumna of UP Asterisk. She works with multiple forms of media, which gives emphasis on the awareness of medium and the processes behind the production of materials. She graduated from the University of the Philippines with a degree in Fine Arts, major in painting. Kat Grow won the grand prize in sculpture category in the 46th Shell National Student Art Competition. She has joined group exhibitions which focuses on paper as medium, including Paperweight in Altromondo and Position 2019 in Galerie Stephanie. In 2019, she mounted her first solo exhibition, Terraforming Rituals. So let's welcome Ms. Kat Grow to share her process as an artist.
Ayan, okay. Thank you, Ate Angge, for that wonderful introduction. I will start sharing my screen with you. So I will be talking about my own artistic practice and how I deal with paper as an artist. So yes, again, my name is Kat Grow. I'm based in Laguna. I'm a visual artist. I graduated with a BFA major in painting. So this is just like a sample profile from my portfolio actually. I mounted my first two solo shows at Galerie Stephanie. And actually Ricky has mentioned about Position Paper before in 2018. He actually invited me to that group show. And that kind of launched me to the current style that I actually still practice now. So these are actually samples of my works. Just so you have like a general idea of how my artworks look like. So yes, so just to give you an idea, Um, my artistic practice is a process-based one. That means that I actually am more submerged with the process of making materials, aka the tools that artists use. That means I make my own pigments from natural resources and raw materials. Most of them are sourced here locally in the Philippines. So these are actually, it's a photo of my studio when I was segregating the materials that I got from Abra, because I have a supplier who is an indigenous people, who is also a master in textile dyeing. So these are also natural things that they use for our textiles in the Philippines. So like these are from trees and then from plants. Sometimes like so you have the organic materials as well as inorganic materials like rocks and soils. So I make my own pigments, and then it just so happens that these pigments are affixed onto paper because I have been my experience with the material. Well, I have been doing watercolor paintings for over 6 years now, and that's been my main media. But with my process in making pigments, just an overview on how you can create your own paints. You have your pigments and a binder, and the binder actually fixes the pigments onto the surface. So for watercolor, that means you're using gum arabic, and then you can add other additives for preservation or difference in performance of your paint. So these are actually samples of how watercolors look like when they are done. So you have the half pans, no, and usually are you're more familiar with this image when you buy watercolors from the store, right? So my workspace is this. Um, However, very specific materials can react with paper differently. So for example, this is a semi-precious mineral, azurite. If you grind that up to a fine powder, the particle size actually dictates what color or hue or brilliance you can achieve with the pigment. So if particles are a little bit bigger, it turns into a richer blue. But once you pound that up to an even finer particle, it kind of becomes much lighter. So under a microscope, sorry, these minerals are actually still kind of like shards on your paper. So when you're painting with such materials on paper, you are actually um, scratching the surface of the paper. So as an artist, you're very concerned about how your medium and your ground interacts with each other. Of course, because you're thinking of longevity. So, aside from precious minerals and inorganic materials, you have organic paints that come from plants and trees. Now, these materials can create dyes or can also be turned into insoluble pigments. However, you do play around with the pH levels or acidity of these materials. So, acidity very much interferes or affects the paper, because if you have acid materials fixed on your paper, of course, your paper will weather or degrade and deteriorate over time. So this has to do more on conservation, I think. But you also think of that as an artist, no? Because you're also responsible of the life of your artworks. So another example of an organic material that you can create pigments with is this is a type of bug, an insect that is dried, and then once they are prepared, gives you a very nice like almost like a magenta or crimson color,
Mm.
no?
Mm.
And of course, if you're using organic materials such as insects, anything that has life, plants and trees, they do change over time on your paper. So let me show you some of my works that I did for Position Paper 1 in 2018. This is the first ever show for that when I made these. These are all locally sourced dyes. I can pinpoint which one is which. This is actually the root crop ube, and this is the one in the middle here is from tawa-tawa, which is the plant. And then this over here is indigo. So these are all grown here in the Philippines. And I entitled the series as Dying Lands using, I kind of play around with puns also with my title. So Dying Lands because it has to do with sustainability of resources and how our practice affects the ecological, like the ecosystem of the Philippines. And so after, I think, many years, of course, decades, because these are made from plants, the colors will actually um, change. So that's as expected of the artworks, no? And then so how I work with paper mainly is, for example, I have this artwork that I did for Galerie M in Tagaytay. What I do is, as you can see, I have a lot of layers and pieces of paper, which I glue together using pH-free or acid-free glue. So this is like the behind the scenes take on it. So I make sure that all the pieces of paper are numbered, because prior to actually painting on the pieces of paper, I want to first compose the whole thing, so that I know which part goes where and which piece of paper actually has to be the lightest shade. So that's how the planning stage is and how I develop the artwork. So I hand tear all of the papers. It's very intuitive. There is no set rules as to how big the tear should be. And the torn forms are they create these organic forms reminiscent of mountains or mountain ranges, right? Ayan, so this is just a close-up photo of, like, I keep all of the materials that are like excess of a certain process. And then I really don't like wasting things with pigments and with paper, especially because, of course, when you're like cutting and tearing a lot of paper, there are little bits and pieces that are left over. So I keep all of those and make sure that for the next artwork, I will try to utilize that. So my studio is filled with lots of papers from previous artworks. And here you can see that I've also started incorporated geometric forms. So I've started cutting the papers with a cutter and incorporating that in the artworks. And of course, I have also tried trying to tear the paper to mimic certain forms. So these are actually the silhouettes of certain islands in dispute between the Philippines and mainland China. So to actually create like a composition, and then my title is Recollecting, because trying to recall or collate memories of boundaries and who owns what, because I think that people and nations do not really have the rights over what the earth produces. Actually, we come from the soil and we return to that with nothing, right? So another concern, I think, for artists is rubbing on the surfaces of their papers, because there is a technique called lifting, where you try to take out as much paint as you can to create these negative spaces or highlights. So sometimes if you rub too much, naghihimulmul yung surface of the paper, so you're actually ruining the surface. So that subtractive process is kind of hazardous sometimes if you are not conscious enough. And then there, so you have here what I mentioned before, the excess bits of paper, which I also keep. And here for this artwork in particular, I started showing the white fibers of the actual paper to utilize that to create lines. And then, as I mentioned before, these are two different paintings, which I used two different minerals that potentially scratch on the paper, but I tried to lay in the paints as soft as I can to create different intensities in the color. And then most recently during the pandemic, I am now experimenting with also folding the papers to create lines. So this is actually that's actually the secret on how I made these very straight lines. No, the pigments would settle in the creases, but also sometimes without the paints here on top. These are just shadows created by the folds and creases. So there, but there are also problems that you encounter like this. Certain parts get very, I think, abused. So some of the paint passes through the paper. So ayan, but here naman wala, I didn't encounter that problem na anymore. So there, and also one big thing for artists actually to be mindful of is their framing, because it's a very we live in the Philippines, it's a very humid country, and we have to make sure that we take measures in trying to at least basically try to conserve the artworks, no. So for me, I've tried getting my artworks framed with so many different framers, but so far I have found my like home framer. Like, he's kind of like my collaborator as well, so he knows how my artworks are and how to actually elevate them further with the framing, no. Okay, and then so as I mentioned, he kind of collaborates with me as well. So I owe him this very nice art shape for these paintings because he made the matting for me. And at first he was saying, paano kaya ito? But he's very brilliant. So he figured out how to do this himself. And then another thing worth mentioning is how to actually store your unused and used papers. No, yes, you have to. For me, I take in measurements like putting in my own desiccants and humidifier. So I have a small machine where I place my paints and my papers so that you can keep them. Because if you store and hoard a lot of nice papers, of course, sometimes when you're in an art store, you get very excited as an artist. No, you buy and buy and buy all sorts of different brands you want to try. But then you're left with how many papers you haven't touched for how many years. So that's actually not advisable because sometimes these papers get exposed to moisture and you cannot use them over time anymore because you get blotching. No. And I think that's mostly it. But let me share this with you. This is from Paperweight from In Altromondo. So these are all tissue that I actually kept because whenever I'm cleaning my workstation, I have to make sure everything is very clean before I change another color. So this is just a question on how we assign value, because the bottled item is tissue, but the label is demonetized cash from Bangko Sentral of the Philippines. So for me, it's kind of like an ironic take also on value assignment. So there, okay. Thank you. Thank you, UP Asterisk, for inviting me to do this talk with you.
Ayun. Salamat. Thank you, Kat. I would be interested to see a retrospective of your work in the next siguro 10 years, no? Kung anong kulay yung mangyayari, no? That would be nice.
Yes.
Ayan, Sir Ricky, meron ka ng curatorial project. So, invite nyo kami. Ayun, siguro one good takeaway from what she presented was, in a time where we're all waiting and we're all worried about the effects of wearing masks and face shield. Kasi may epekto yun sa environment eh. A lot of people are not thinking about where all these plastic masks and face shields are going after we've used all of them. Tinatapon natin yan, pero yung pag-dispose niyan after the trash truck gets it from our home, medyo question pa yan eh. So that's probably going to go to our waters, and we're one of the most producers of plastic waste in the world. So it's a very interesting project to reflect on. There's something spiritual and mindful about the process. Pag tiningnan mo yung work ni Kat, parang simple lang, no? But you fall in love with it when you listen to the process of the artwork, kasi there's a sense of respect to nature, indigenous materials, which I think should be explored by a lot of our artists these days. I mean, okay naman yung bumibili tayo ng materials, but collaborating, I guess, with the scientific aspects of materials, katulad nung sinabi niya, may chemistry involved. Yung interdisciplinary take on art making would be a really good practice to explore by our artists. Yung tema niya rin, yung going back to nature, that's very nice. Kailangan natin yung ganyang markings these days. Reflection, parang yung works niya, walang masyadong figurative images, but you have to really reflect on how she made it in connection to nature and indigenous culture in the Philippines. So, yun, napakaganda, ano ba yun? Nakakataba ng kaluluwa ang iyong proseso bilang artist. So, thank you for sharing your practice with us. Yun. So if we have questions from the audience, I think there are some questions from the Zoom chat. Sorry, teka lang. Ayan na. Binabasa ko na siya. Number 1, first question from Vincent Tan. Hello, sir. Andyan ka pa ba? Co-teacher ko siya sa Binil.
Since
I was
Vincent-
wondering where the paper used for printing came from. Was it imported or locally made? I can't seem to think of any local paper making tradition. To Miss Lourdes daw.
Ay,
Yung paper,
hello.
yes.
Yes. As I mentioned earlier in my presentation, the paper came from China, and it was imported, and it came through initially through galleon trading and through local trading. So it was imported from China. And,
din may question.
and up until now, rice paper is still a very strong tradition, Chinese tradition, paper making. And they have many kinds of paper that they produce. But actually, the term rice paper can be very confusing because it's not really made from rice. It's made from a wheat, kind of wheat plant that they specifically use just for paper. Okay. I hope that answers the
Parang
question.
walang ano, true, walang local paper making, in terms of like local, yung paper na papel na yung what we're used to. Pero kasi indigenous Filipinos would write it in leaves, trunk of trees. And yun yung parang paper concept natin, I guess, in indigenous culture. Yun, pero walang local paper making tradition, tama. So China pa rin. Okay, hindi talaga natin sila maitatanggi sa ating kultura, guys. Question to all. In the history of Philippine art and in the contemporary, what can be observed in the trend of artists using paper as medium? What can be observed in the trend of artists using paper as medium? Is there a trend? Yes, Sir Ricky.
Well, historically speaking kasi, paper was used for printmaking and drawings, and then later on watercolors. So, as a support, lagi siyang ginagamit as a medium in art. Usually it's used as a support. Pero may mga contemporary artists who are using paper as the main medium na, katulad ni Cat Grow. So that's one of the more recent things na napapansin ko in the past 10 years.
May iba? Kat? Baka may pwede
Yes. I think recently, I think people are more experimental nowadays because we see a lot of paper cuttings as the actual artworks, right? And they create paper sculptures. So I don't think that's something that was existent for like 100 years ago. So we have a lot of local artists doing that. We had that also in position paper.
Actually, yeah, the exhibition that Sir Ricky curated, paper can already be used as a lens to look at art history. That's a one perspective. Kasi mga modern artists yung na-mention ni Sir Ricky, some of them are modern artists, and I don't know, baka pagalitan ako ng mga teacher ko. Baka meron, hindi ko lang nabasa, o baka absent ako sa class, but I haven't encountered a lot of readings about, paper as a lens to art history. Well, there's printmaking, definitely, but yung siguro, paano ba? Paper as a documentation for artworks, or yun yung focus ay hindi yung image, kundi yung material, yung medium. So, hindi pa siguro masyado na-explore. Kung meron man, pakisend yung link ng PDF. But, yun, wala pa ako masyado na-encounter as an art history teacher. Pero, magandang lens yung position paper. Yun po. So, next question. How can we best take care of paper works at home? From Marisa Lucero. How can we best take care of paper works at home? Feed it to the dog, Char.
Well, I think I have to answer that. So, well, basically, when you paper art, you mean paper artworks, right? So, similar to say an artwork that Kat is doing. So, well, first of all, you have to, in conservation, is preventive is better than cure. So I think the first thing to do is to secure your storage. So make sure that you have the most ideal as far as you can do to make the storage of the artwork secure. No, it doesn't have to be high sophisticated. You just have to do basic. Say, keep your artwork in an acid-free storage box, or say if it's framed, then make sure that the framing is at least is done in a conservation quality manner. So you have to, if for example, I saw wood sa ano ni Kat, dun sa framing, make sure lang that at least there's a treatment between the wood and the paper. If you cannot avoid not putting them together or close together. So it doesn't you don't have to be it doesn't have to be a sophisticated or high-tech manner. You just have to, and then of course the basics, light and acidity. So it has to be avoided. So keep them in a at least securely dark place. Avoid natural sunlight. Avoid even artificial light. So any photo damage, even gradual photo damage, can create negative effect on the art.
Thank you.
To add to
Sir Ricky.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to that kasi a lot of the artworks from the 1980s and the early 90s that are damaged right now, na works on paper, were damaged because the framers used ang tawag ko dito yung glue na rugby.
Yeah, acidic.
Kasi a lot of framers don't want the paper to buckle. Buckling is a natural parang reaction of paper when it's very humid, so it will expand. So a lot of people don't like to see this. So what they do is use rugby, but there are ways around this. Instead of fixing it on a surface, you could actually use hinging. Lou is an expert on framing and on paper. So if you need to ask advice, please ask Lou. Binolunteer, sorry. And that was also correct yung kanina. Make sure that when you're bringing out paper, at least hinugasan nyo yung kamay nyo kasi yung kamay nyo could be dirty or may oils which could leave marks. Tapos the humidifier is your best friend kasi lalo na pag tag-ulan, sobrang may chance na amagin. Tapos also, practical tip. Pag magpapa-frame kayo, please have it framed on summer. Meron kaming mga naging experience na tag-ulan sila nagpa-frame, naging microclimate yung loob, nilagay sa condo na may aircon. Pag on ng aircon, lumamig yung salamin at naging tubig yung humidity, nabasa yung artwork. So, summer is better.
Thank you. Okay, next question from Buko ng Papaya. Any tips on the specs of paper when collecting art pieces on paper? Specs of paper daw.
Acid-free is good. Thicker paper is better. Pero Kat could answer this better kasi she's focused dyan.
I'm not so sure because do collectors actually ask very specific questions about the paper? Usually, diba, they are more concerned about the image. But ayun nga, as Ricky said, yes, we go with acid-free paper. Although, as my framer has told me before, even if you handle acid-free paper and when you didn't wash your hand as an artist, diba? Once you touch it, it's not acid-free anymore. So I think it's more of a concern in terms of, I think, conserving the artwork.
Okay. Thank you. From Maya, I think it's the same question. May preferred paper ka ba sa works mo? Same.
Okay.
From wait. Tapos na to.
Can I add something?
Sige, go.
But for me, it's so from the perspective of an artist, ako with my particular practice is I deal with a lot of washes on top of one piece of paper. So I cannot really actually do that with very thin paper, which is like 180 GSM and lower or thinner. So I just work with 300 GSM solely, which is the thickness of the paper, or better yet 600 GSM, but that can be very expensive and hard to manage when you are dealing with buckling of the paper. Kasi once that dries up and has curves, mahirap nang i-flat down. So for me, I actually use Fabriano 300 GSM watercolor paper. So yan, very ano lang. Very exclusive to that right now.
Very technical. Oo. I guess Ma'am Norma is here. Baka may comments ka, Ma'am Norma.
I
Sa
saw
talk natin.
I think I saw something like a question a while ago. From parang about the artworks na pinakita ni Miss Lou. I think there was a question kanina. You might as well answer that, no? Maybe
Yung sa paper
Yes.
making ba, ma'am?
sa paper making, no, the old artwork by
Gaspar.
she mentioned something like there was a
Yes.
question to Miss Lou. Might as
Yes.
well answer that first, no?
Yes. I actually read the question from Miss Mika. Is that correct? It's about the Passion book by Gaspar Aquino de Belen.
Yes.
And it was actually a very popular book. I actually did not include it, although it was actually part of the period that I was discussing. So from the early years up to the golden age of printing. So tama ka, Mika, when you said na si Gaspar Aquino de Belen. But I must say, Gaspar Aquino de Belen was the writer. Hindi siya yung naglimbag nung passion na libro. So, yes, tama ka. Ito ay isang, it was a very popular book, yung Passion na yan, and it was an illustrated book. So, during that time, it served as a, not only for religion, it didn't serve just the religious aspect of the locals. It was also parang entertainment as well for them. So it was illustrated. It depicted the passion, the life, the passion of Christ. So for them, it was really very. It was more than a book on religious. It was more than a religious book. So, yes. So anyway, that's right. Did I answer you correct, Mika?
Yes.
Kasi baka I
hopefully.
think you were confused na you mentioned Gaspar Aquino de Belen ay isang master printer na Kasi sa printing, the Spanish colonial, the author, and then you have the printer. So sometimes nilalagay pareho kung sino yung nagsulat at sino yung naglimbag. So yan. I hope that answers the question.
Yes. We can entertain 2 more questions. One question for Miss Lourdes from Noni. Sana tama yung basa ko. Noni Gatarin. Does the Archdiocesan Museum of Manila accept requests for paper conservation from other institutions or museums?
Yes.
Yes. Yes. Actually, concerning that, right now, since the beginning of the pandemic, we are indefinitely closed. Previously, we would take, as extension service, we would accept artworks from individuals or other institutions. But right now, we have temporarily stopped doing that in order to focus on our own collections. So maybe in the future, eventually we can open to the public as a form of extension service. Pero right now, we're not accepting any extension service or outside. That's not within the Archdiocese of Manila.
One last question from Matthew Carretero. From Troy Carretero. Visual journals, yes po. Visual journals, diaries on paper by artists serve as sources of narratives related to travel or journey. Can you also expound on the relationship of paper with memory and place? I'm very interested in interrelated elements, travel, place or memory, and painting as embodiment of experience. Lalim nun ah. Pang Miss Universe ka, Choy, ha? Grabe, ano ba to? Thesis
Ang Miss
defense?
Universe yata yun.
Ang Miss Universe yung contestant number 1? Yes. Opo, sige.
Ang hirap sagutin yung breadth ng practice ng kasi there are a lot of artists who do travel journals, Geraro, Fernando Sobel. Well, personally, ako kasi sinusubaybayan ko yung works ni Juvenal Sansó. He brought paper and ink and brush everywhere he went noong nagta-travel siya from 1954 hanggang 1972 around the world. Paper was very, very, kasi, pwede mong bitbitin. So, madali para sa isang artist na bitbitin yun. And you could see strokes for every place. Merong din aspects of the place na na-highlight doon sa nagawa niya. So, I'm sure merong kinalaman yung itong panahon o yung pagiging maulan doon sa pagmamadali niya sa pagtrabaho. So, I'm sure you could actually mount an entire travel journal or exhibition about this. Share yun na lang.
Any other speaker po? Baka may gustong mag-comment. Place, memory, embodiment of experience. Wow.
Yeah, I think the Velarde map, it tells us a lot.
Ma'am Norma po.
Yeah. I think the Velarde map tells us a lot kasi yung sa may gilid niya, kita niyo yung mga sceneries and what people are doing, di ba? Yung parang everyday life, kikita natin doon, no? So parang that one is very, it has lots of things to say, about the Philippines, yung Velarde map, which was when was that? 1734. Print, engraving on paper, engraved print on paper. Yeah. Isa pa, isa pang gusto ko sanang, pwede ba? Magdagdag lang ako ng konti.
Sige ma'am, opo.
Wala nga tayong parang papel na kultura, no? I mean, we have bark cloths. Comes from bark, no? And pero we have also writings like the baybayin, and yet we use the bamboo. We etch the baybayin sa bamboo. So parang, yeah, it's interesting that we were so used to depending on the Chinese paper. kaya the Chinese, they were the ones who were inscribing everything that they saw. They would be writing on paper and then or do drawings on paper like yung Baxter Codex, no? Pero tayo parang we had other ways. We had like for example, textiles. Doon natin sinusulat. Yung epic nandun, no? We don't use it. We don't use the paper and the pen and the iba ang ating medium. Parang ganun. Iba rin yung sa textiles, sa tattoo. Those are the ones that we use, no? Parang iba yung medium natin, no? Na nakasanayan natin. Parang siguro pinaubayan natin sa Chinese historians or mga scribes, no? Sila talaga nagsusulat using paper. But ako nagtataka rin, bark cloth nga eh. Bark cloth. Yes, Ma'am Lu.
Yes, to add to Ma'am Norma's statement, Yeah, it's true. It's possible that we have been relying on the Chinese imports for paper. And since they have been making paper since the 700 BC, so I
BC.
think, yes. So I think they have a very long history. They have a very long history of, I'm sorry, 700 AD. Sorry, I'm sorry, 700 AD. Yes, sorry, I'm sorry, 700 AD. So they have a very long history of paper making. So I guess it's possible that we have been, and maybe we had utilized what was available to us. So that time it was easier to, we're a tropical country. We live in the island, so we had lush vegetation. So that was available to us, and we did make use of them. We wove textiles. So
Yeah, to react on on Ma'am Norma's statement. Siguro tama nga yung medium kasi natin was not the concept of Chinese Chinese production of paper. And if you remember from Miss Lu's presentation, sinabi niya na may baybayin version yung Doctrina Christiana, which is one of the earliest printed material in the Philippines. And that also says that if the Spaniards were propagating Catholicism in the Philippines, kailangan nila mag-translate into baybayin for people to understand. So, ibig sabihin, yun na nga, going back to baybayin, we already have a structure of writing. Meron na tayong, way of writing na sinusulat sa bamboo. So, medium lang, yung content is the same, and the idea of writing and documenting and making rules and all these things for communities and balangays, pero iba lang yung material culture, yung material na ginagamit.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
Maybe I could add to
sige.
the question before, because for us, kuwari, when I was still studying in UP, in my first year, we were all required to have visual journals and diaries for, I think, 3 subjects, major subjects. So in each class, we had a piece of like a book that you have to fill up every day. So I think those bound pieces of paper were testaments to where we were. For example, like what Ricky said, if we were outdoors and it suddenly rained and we were sketching like the view of the sunken garden, of course the paper would get weathered. So there are actually the physicality of the actual paper gets influenced by our experience. Also, I think in history, the types of paper that were available also at different periods of time can also help you identify na what was the progress or innovation at the time and so on.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. So it was,
meron pa po. Sige, ma'am.
Yeah. Okay na. Sa tingin ko,
Okay na po.
iba lang talaga yung medium natin. Iba lang.
Po.
Yeah. Kasi very rich yung textiles natin in designs. We express our ideas through those, no? Pero not in that form na on paper. Kasi ephemeral na yung paper, napaka-madaling pero we use tattoo, we use bamboo, no? Pang matagalan tayo eh. Pang matagalan siguro yung aspeto ng kultura natin. And look at the manunggul jar. We use other medium eh. We use the other medium to express our thoughts and ideas. Parang paper.
Sige po. To conclude, I guess, we can talk about paper all day. There's a lot to be explored in the arts, in chemistry, in art making, curatorial practice, and we can also romanticize so much about the material culture of paper. We can learn so much from it, that things are ephemeral. I mean, we make marks, but things are ephemeral, and kailangan natin tanggapin yun. And one thing is the mindfulness that we can apply to the making of paper or art production in relation to paper, and how we can relate it to nature, to history, to heritage. Ang daming ang daming pwedeng possibilities for paper as medium and art making, as a form and as a metaphor about the things happening around us. So Yun. Thank you, Aste babies, Aste young people for organizing this. Congratulations sa inyong first event. Meron ba kayong gustong sabihin? Si Gian, baka ipapromote pa ulit yung event. Thank you for inviting me as a moderator. Nakakamiss tong mga ganitong diskurso. Yun. Dati nag-uusap lang kami ng ganito sa mga sulok-sulok ng diliman. Paupo-upo lang kami, tapos nag-art talk lang kami. Ayan. Ganyan, zoom na tayo ngayon, guys. Sige po. Gian, may sasabihin ka pa ba? Or should we close the event?
Yes po. Pwede na po.
Yes, ma'am. Sorry.
I-promote ko na lang po siguro yung... sorry. I-promote ko na lang po yung event. Follow mga next events for the next few weeks. So again, thank you very much po to Miss Maria Lourdes Po, Sir Ricky Francisco, Ate Kat Grow, and Miss Angelica Viceral, and also to Ma'am Respicio for joining us in this very informative and very engaging and enriching talk. So we also like to promote the next online event of UP Asterisk for the on paper online art series. So after this talk, we will be having a online paper making workshop to be facilitated by another UP Asterisk alumna, si Miss Francine Lima. So just visit our Facebook page and other social media platforms to register. So the registration is free, and also we also have an option to that for the participants to order paper making kit. So just visit our event page for more information. So yun lang po. Go Ate Angel.
Ay, okay na. Sige, maraming salamat.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to all the speakers. Thank you, Lou, Ricky.